Welcome into episode 141 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm August Trometer.
WWDC, camp for the nerds who make Angry Birds, and Twitter clients, and all the things that make "there's an app for that" true. This week we're looking at a few of the security moves Apple made at WWDC, plus what was August Trometer's favorite reveal. Stay tuned for that reveal on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. Well, just about everything that happened had some security angle to it. I don't know that we are actually tackling this in anything like an organized way, but we will tackle it, starting actually with one that's kind of a follow-up from something we did a few weeks ago. You may remember a dust-up about a month ago between Apple and developers of various parental control apps in the App Store. The supposition in a report from the New York Times was that Apple started removing or restricting popular parental control apps after the release of its own screen time solution last year in iOS 12. In response, Apple said the issue wasn't the fact that those apps compete with screen time. Rather, what Apple said was that these apps are using an enterprise technology that provided them access to kids' highly sensitive personal data. We do not think it is okay for any apps to help data companies track or optimize advertising of kids, said Apple. Now, you may remember the enterprise technology to which Apple was referring was MDM, or Mobile Device Management Technology. Mac Rumors explains MDM is intended for enterprise users to manage their company-owned devices, and Apple said the use of MDM by consumer-focused apps carried privacy and security concerns. But now Apple is cool with it. At least kinda. The Mac Rumors piece says Apple has used WWDC to update its App Store review guidelines. Among those updates, a conditional green light for parental control apps to use MDM technology. The piece quotes part of the newly added Guideline 5.5, saying you must make a clear declaration of what user data will be collected and how it will be used on an app screen prior to any user action to purchase or otherwise use the service. MDM apps must not violate local laws. Apps offering MDM services may not sell, use, or disclose to third parties any data for any purpose and must commit to this in their privacy policy. Apps that do not comply with this guideline will be removed from the App Store, and you may be removed from the Apple Developer Program. I guess what I'm wondering is, does this surprise you?
Not really, especially given the antitrust investigation that's now going on with Apple and the App Store. I honestly believe Apple wants to have a fairly level playing field, even though whatever playing field they have, they're always the home team. So people are going to use Apple's apps over a third-party app to start with. Mm-hmm. That said, it's tough when security and privacy are an issue, and I think that's what they were trying to deal with here. And, Apple does change the guidelines when new use cases come up that they really haven't foreseen, and I see this as one of those. My previous company, Yowza, actually forced a change in the guidelines, and honestly, that was kind of cool that they actually listened to a developer and they said, you're right, our guidelines need tweaked, and they tweaked them. And I think they continually monitor what's going on with apps, and they try and do that.
All right, hold on a second, because I did have another question ready, but how did Yowza force a change in the guidelines?
So at that point in time, you were not allowed to have advertising within your app. The way they specified it is you were not allowed to have advertising within your app, and the way that Yowza did it was against the guidelines. And so they changed the guidelines to basically say, unless the whole app is basically advertising, which since it was a mobile coupon app, that's exactly what we were doing.
Wow. So I'm kind of proud of you, and I'm also kind of mad at you. But, we can talk about that sometime when we're not recording.
I get that a lot.
Yeah. Let's get back to the whole MDM thing, because what I don't understand, one of the things that we talked about when we covered it on the checklist was how Apple wouldn't necessarily know what somebody was doing in a mobile device management situation. It seems to me that this thing that they're talking about now with, the kids would actually be a harder thing to check.
I totally agree. I'd like to think there's some sort of automated process that they're using to check this stuff out. But the bottom line is that bad guys are bad guys and they're going to do bad things. And so it's really hard for me to see how this is going to be policed. It's probably going to come down to vigilant third parties, security researchers, or maybe just an angry parent complaining to Apple or taking violations to the press, at which point Apple will then clamp down on that particular company. But I do think that it's going to be really hard for them to police this.
My hope would be, and my hopes amount to as little as anybody else's, I suppose, but my hope would be that in a situation like this, where Apple did have this concern, where so much noise has been made, that these will not be apps that are like, okay, it didn't crash my phone, so we're going to go ahead and put it through. Actually, you know what? Let's have somebody run this one on their phone for a bit and check what's going on.
Well, the thing is that, Apple is a very large company, and there are a lot of people that work there. Mm-hmm. And those people, a lot of them have kids. So they're concerned about this just as much as any other parent. And they're probably going to do whatever they need to do to make sure that, kids stay safe.
Yes, but as you pointed out earlier, most people are going to use Apple's solution. And I would imagine Apple employees are even more likely than everybody else to do that.
Yes.
In addition, the updated guidelines offer another option for parental control apps, according to the piece. Approved providers will be allowed to use one of Apple's personal VPN APIs. Now, I have a very basic idea of how VPNs work. I'm wondering, though, if you can give me an idea of what Apple's personal VPN API is and how it might help in a parental controls issue.
Yeah, I wasn't able to go to WWDC this year. I only know what I've read online and of Apple's documentation of the VPN API. So it's new. But it looks like a way to give apps the ability to protect the user. I don't see it so much helping the actual parental controls, but it's definitely going to help protect the data given by kids. And basically, the VPN API allows third parties to encrypt end-to-end the data being shared in an app. And, hopefully it will also obscure the IP address in case the database gets hacked. The IP address is such an important piece of information, and especially when you start talking about location. That said, those apps still have access to that data, and you're still at risk if the company is not trustworthy. And that's probably, up to Apple to vet some of these companies.
Keeping in with the kids, because, thematic. It's kind of hard to believe that this wasn't a thing before, but, at least it is now. Engadget says among the changes outlined for developers this week are limits on tracking and ads in apps for kids. According to the piece, developers are no longer permitted to include third-party ads or analytics tools, which are ostensibly used for tracking, in apps in the App Store's kids category. Now, I got to say, I have a friend who got really excited about this because she hates all of the ads in the games that her kids download, except those wouldn't actually be in the kids category. They'd end up being in the games category rather.
Sure. And, as a developer, you sort of have to specify who your audience is, whether it's for kids or adults or whatever, depending on the content that's in the app. So maybe that's how Apple is policing that. I'm really not quite sure. But I do agree that, kids versus games, there are games that are clearly for adults. They've got blood and gore and all that kind of thing. And then there are apps for kids. and developers specify that. So hopefully that's how Apple is breaking that down.
So on the kids, I mean, because that's the thing in this, and I wish I had the documentation in front of me. What I have is the quote from the Engadget piece instead. Like, I don't know if this is just a change that is for apps that show up in the kids category, or if they're games that are, I can't remember what the age ranges are. I think 4 and under, 13 and under, whatever. I wish I knew what exactly that was, because on the one hand, you think, well, if it's only for the kids category, how is that not a thing anyway? Let's start with that one. I wonder if this is a change or if this is something that Apple is stressing as part of its continued privacy push.
Well, as your friend pointed out, she hates the ads that are in apps for the games. So it's clearly a change. And it's definitely one for the better. It's so hard to predict how bad guys are going to behave. If we knew that, banks would never get robbed. In this case, it's hard to know how companies are going to take advantage of kids. It's just nice to know that, someone at Apple has considered that a priority and is trying to stay on top of things. I do think that this has been a long time coming. I mean, my goodness, it's been over a decade of iOS releases, and we're only now seeing Apple jump on this.
It's also interesting to note, and I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but they're making this change, within a month and a half of Apple Arcade coming out? Within a little bit of time of Apple saying, oh, by the way, we do have all of these games that aren't going to have ads and $10 a month, and so your kid won't be bothering you about buying more Smurf berries or buying a new game or anything like that. Just sign up, and then here's a bunch of games, no blood or ads included.
Or Smurf berries.
Or Smurf berries, that's true. I miss Smurf berries. They were the best. I will say, if this is a change, I don't see how it wasn't already a thing. And maybe that's what you were just saying a minute ago. I mean, we've had this for 10 years. How are we just getting around to protecting kids from these kinds of things? But then again, Apple was wrong about how apps were going to go anyway, because web apps, August, web apps.
Yeah, no kidding. Maybe it's just press and PR. Maybe it's governmental pressure, or maybe just the powers that be in Cupertino finally decided it was time, especially now that they're really, really hammering the privacy nail, which is fantastic. And why they haven't done this before is beyond me. Because, like I said earlier, 10 years of iOS releases, and we haven't seen this for kids. That's kind of crazy to me.
Engadget goes on to say developers are also prohibited from including external links or in-app purchases unless they're in a section of the app only accessible to parents. That has to have already been a thing.
Well, with parental controls, which, weren't introduced all that long ago.
Yeah.
They could previously approve a purchase. But, like we've talked about here before, most people just click OK on any dialog box that pops up. This, though, seems to indicate that now parents will have to be the ones who actually buy it within the app. And I think that's fantastic. As a new parent, it's a really great feature. My kid's too young to even hold a phone right now.
Yeah.
But, when it comes time, for him to buy Smurf berries, I want to be the one who actually, gives the okay.
Yeah, this seems like great news for relatively new parents, and a giant pain in the backside for people whose kids have been able to just, tap that they want to buy something and have it turn up on their parent's phone. Because it could actually be a change where, the parent actually has to go and see that. And that's going to be annoying for everybody. I mean, it's better. It's safer. There are a number of reasons that it's great. And it's going to take time for a lot of people to get used to the fact that, I really have to actually pay attention now.
Well, the thing is, the keynote was on Monday. Mm-hmm. We're recording this on a Wednesday. Mm-hmm. So no one has really had a chance to see how this is implemented. And it's very likely that some of those controls will be in the parental controls where you can give your kid some autonomy if you want to. I don't know that for sure. And maybe you can't. Maybe it is just going to be a pain in the backside. But I would like to think that they would have thought of that.
As I said at the start of the show, I mean, there were lots of points throughout the presentation Monday where Apple focused on privacy. Let's hit a few more of them now. Location protections. Apps will apparently need to ask more often to keep accessing a user's location. iOS will also issue background tracking alerts, and the operating system will include Wi-Fi and Bluetooth protections, preventing apps from using a user's surroundings to track them.
Yeah, when a developer builds an app, they include a file that's called an entitlements file. And basically, that's a file that asks permission to access certain functionality on the phone. Maybe the app needs access to your contacts, for example. The entitlements file specifies this, and then when your app needs that access, it asks your permission. And you go, oh, yeah, it's fine that, they have access to my contacts.
Hang on a second, because I want to ask you something, because this actually hits on something that we've talked about a few times over the past few weeks. I haven't understood why it is that apps were asking for information that there was no apparent need for it. And it almost sounds like you're saying these entitlements files basically, I know it's not quite this easy, but it almost sounds like you're saying you could just go through as the developer and click all the boxes for all the information that you want to be entitled to. And then if that sails through the App Store, then you've got access to that information, as long as I've said fine, which I'm going to say because I want the app and I don't want to read 28 pages of gobbledygook.
That is correct. And the reviewers at Apple are supposed to try and decide whether or not an app needs certain entitlements. So, for example, if you have a game, what was it like? Super Kung Fu Ninja Tomatoes or whatever it was that we did a story on a couple of months back. And all of a sudden it's asking for access to your calendar. The reviewer goes, no.
Yeah. Well, that important Super Kung Fu Tomato tournament's coming up next week, though, so I can certainly see why it would need that. All right, so get us back to, I mean, that's interesting, and I appreciate that illustration because that actually clears up a lot of the questions I've had over the past few shows. So take me back to what's going on now with location specifically.
Well, location is something that a lot of apps use, but many apps also abuse it. Uber, and I'm not trying to pick on them, but they had a history for a long time of abusing your location data. The entitlement it asked for was to always know your location, even if the app was running.
I'm sorry, even if the app wasn't running?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and their explanation was, well, that way we optimize where we send vehicles. If you're nearby, we want them to be near you in case you order one. But it also allowed for a lot of spying, which is kind of what they got in hot water for. They've really stopped doing that. But Apple still keeps playing whack-a-mole to stop that kind of abuse. When you sit there and go, okay, you grant them a one-time use to look at your location, or you get a report to see what apps are using your location and how often they're doing that. That really puts a nail in the coffin of companies who abuse location information. And I really, really love these changes.
Now, there's a new thing that Apple is introducing that we're going to dig into a tiny bit. It's a login tech called Sign In with Apple. Just as you can use your Google account or Facebook account to sign into some third-party services, Apple will let you use your Apple ID, though you won't have to let the third party use it. Basically, if you choose to hide your email address from the third party, Apple will make an anonymous email address for that third party with a different one for each third party with which a user uses Sign In with Apple. They then forward email from those third parties to the user, keeping the contact info off the third party servers. When you tire of receiving email from them, you just kill the anonymous email address and you're no longer receiving information from them. Like I say, we're gonna go deep on this one a little bit, but I'm curious what your initial thoughts are on Sign In with Apple.
I love it. I love everything about it. It puts your personal data into your hands so you can choose what to do with it. That said, the service is only as good as the company who provides it. And as much as I like Apple, you always have to ask that question. Under current management, privacy seems to be especially important. But as the company evolves, who knows what's going to happen? So, you get 10 years down the line, Tim Cook's gone, and all of a sudden the stock price is kind of, taking a dip. Does Apple sit there and go, hey, we got all this data. Let's start using it and selling it. And those are the kind of things that worry me. And hopefully they're building privacy into the company's DNA so that doesn't happen.
Yes. I'm sorry. I kind of wanted to argue with you a tiny bit, but there's no point because you're talking about 10 years from now or 15. The one thing I would say, if Apple can be trusted, and, who knows? I mean, they've certainly built a reputation on that, and we certainly hope they can be. I don't think they're sitting on all of this information. They could certainly start collecting it quickly. Exactly. Because, so much of what they do is like, we don't have it. Yeah, the third parties don't have it. You're the only person who has your information. Come iOS 23, I guess it's possible that Apple would say, and what's great is we're already positioned to gather all of this information about you, which would be an interesting thing for Air Force One to sell as a feature, not a dog. Now, Apple is taking the Sign In with Apple thing really seriously. Apple says for consumers, it's going to be an alternative. For developers that use third-party sign-in solutions, it's not an alternative, it's mandatory. According to Apple documentation for developers, Sign In with Apple will be available for beta testing this summer. It will be required as an option for users in apps that support third-party sign-in when it is commercially available later this year. And an article I was reading just before we started recording is Apple is actually, one of the articles I saw said Apple is actually suggesting that developers who use log in with Google, log in with Facebook, and log in with Apple, they would actually prefer that be log in with Apple, and then they don't care how the rest of it goes. They want primacy for log in with Apple. So I guess get used to seeing it if you use third-party logins. Now, Engadget actually quizzed a few experts on this feature, and most of the people they interviewed are like you, August. They seem really happy about it. I want to concentrate, though, on a guy who has not drunk the Kool-Aid. And I'm not saying that you have, but this is a guy who I think is not actually Apple's biggest fan. I don't know that much about him, but just in the way he was answering his questions. But I also don't think he was necessarily wrong about everything, which is why I want to ask you. Asked about the feature overall, Ray Walsh, data privacy expert at proprivacy.com, said being able to sign in without sharing a real email address removes one crucial bit of data from those services' hands. However, web services still get to collect other crucial data from users when they visit their sites, which can still be used to track them. When you visit a website, that service automatically receives your IP address. This is an extremely valuable tracking tool. Thus, Sign In with Apple is only removing one small piece of trackable data from the equation. Is that fair?
Yes.
All right.
He's right about the IP address. That is something that is trackable. But, if you're on an iOS device and your IP and you're connected to, say, the cell tower, your location is within a 3-mile radius of that cell tower. So it's hard to get, an exact location. What happens, though, is that you can start to triangulate if you really wanted to figure out, okay, well, that person's always on this cell tower, so they must live in that part of town. And that's where it kind of gets spooky. Mm-hmm. There are ways to change your IP address when you're at home. You can refresh your IP with your internet service provider, either on your router or on your computer, or what we've recommended here many times before, just using a trusted VPN. And if you're doing that, then the IP address issue he brings up goes away.
Is there more that Apple could do, or more that Apple could have done in this case?
I'd love to see them have their own built-in VPN and just protect everybody. I mean, how cool would that be for them to go, hey, privacy is super important, and it's so important that we're going to protect everyone who uses one of our devices. I would love to see that.
If you think Walsh is harshing on Apple over Google or Facebook, he's not. He goes on to tell Engadget, my advice to consumers is for them to log into all services directly each time without connecting them to any third-party service. This will require an email address, but the consumer can simply use a burner email or an alias provided by a secure email provider. This removes the privacy and security concerns associated with sharing their email address, but also removes the bigger problem of giving cross-platform access to information across distinct platforms and services. Your thoughts on that, sir?
A burner email is a great idea, but that's essentially what Apple is doing here. So I'm not sure exactly where he's coming from on that. And burner emails, a lot of times, if you're using like a third-party service online, a lot of companies forbid that particular anonymous email. Mm-hmm. They just won't let you use it because they know it's a burner. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Apple's anonymous emails and whether or not that happens with that or not. Email is a super valuable piece of information. And a lot of times what you can do is if you have an email address, you can connect that email address to all kinds of other information. There's huge databases out there where you type in an email address and it pulls up credit card numbers and addresses and all of that stuff just based on your email. So an anonymized email address makes that much, much harder. But, when it comes down to it, it's not really the email as much as it is the information you give that website. So you can use a burner email whenever you want to. But if you give them your name and address, then they've got your name and address. So those are the things you have to sort of kind of think about and worry about.
The thing that the guys seem to be most concerned about in the reading I did was not so much the information you are sharing with the service, but the fact that you've got somebody else. You basically got Facebook, Google, or Apple potentially acting as a man in the middle. It goes back to the conversation, what we were talking about a moment ago. Do you trust Apple? You and I trust Apple. So when Apple says, yeah, we're the guy in the middle, but don't worry about it because we're not looking, we're not seeing, we're basically just building a bridge for you to cross. It seemed to me that Mr. Walsh's concern was, okay, but there's still a third party who may have access to this information. I've been trying to figure out why Apple would get into this, and about the only reason I can think of is so it could get people to stop signing in with Google or stop signing in with Facebook. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, the password thing that Apple has set up with Safari across all your devices, with Keychain across all your devices, that's one touch, which I think is why people liked signing in with Google or signing in with Facebook, right?
Sure.
The reason people did that was because, just with one tap, it's authorized or authenticated, whichever you want to say, that you can actually, because I'm signed into Google across everything, just clicking that one button gets me in there. Am I right in thinking that Keychain sort of does that same convenience thing? I mean, might that not be another way for people to keep that information off of Facebook or Google?
Sure. And the Keychain does that, but I think especially with the anonymized email addresses, what Apple is trying to do is prevent that sort of social engineering that we've talked about, where somebody calls a service and says, oh, yeah, my name's Bob Smith and here's my email address and I lost my password. Because with an anonymized email address, they don't have that piece of information anymore. And so that really kind of protects you there. I do also think it's a shot across the bow to Google and to Facebook, especially given Apple's privacy stance lately. I think it's a fantastic thing. I mean, who wants to be marketed to, And that's exactly what Facebook and Google are doing. You said Apple's just building a bridge and saying you can cross it. Facebook and Google are building a bridge and saying, well, here's the toll. And hopefully Apple doesn't start charging a toll.
I got to say, it was a long presentation. I don't know that we're hitting all of the security stuff today. Certainly, we're not hitting all the security stuff that happened, around the whole 4 days or 5 days of WWDC. But we're might not even be hitting everything in the 2 hours plus that they had on stage. But there was one other thing I did want to hit with you today. HomeKit saw 2 privacy-focused features announced. The first was HomeKit Secure Video. Basically, Apple's working with home security camera makers to cover a home without letting anyone but the user see. The video is analyzed in the home, according to Apple, then encrypted and sent to iCloud, where no one can see it but the user. Apple will store 10 days of security clips in the user's iCloud account. Interestingly, that won't count against any iCloud storage limit. Netatmo, Logitech, and Eufy will be among the first playing with that protocol. The other privacy-focused HomeKit feature was HomeKit for routers. CNET explains this one, saying the routers will automatically firewall off each of your smart home accessories to protect them, even if your network is compromised. Linksys, Spectrum, and Eero will be the first HomeKit partners on the router front. Can you give me just a bit more on what Apple has done here with HomeKit?
Sure. When we start talking about IoT, Internet of Things, and we've done a lot of stories where, a doorbell supposedly was hacked or whatever. And I think Apple is trying to make sure that that doesn't happen if you have everything set up properly. The secure video, I think, is great if it does what it says on the tin. That way families can feel safer from prying eyes that shouldn't be seeing that video. In addition to just being able to be creepy and watch, children or adults or what have you, video is one of those ways where you can tell if somebody's home or not. Mm-hmm. And so, theft is always an issue when it comes to that. So, the secure home video, I think, is fantastic. The HomeKit for routers is really interesting because, as you said, it gives a firewall to every single smart device on your network, or at least HomeKit device. So for example, let's say somebody hacks your smart thermostat because they've figured out a way to do that. They wouldn't be able to get access then to your doorbell or webcam or anything else in your home that's HomeKit enabled without having to hack those as well. So it's that extra just step of security. It's another wall to prevent bad guys from doing bad things. It's just a really nice touch to what seems to be Apple's security fight to make sure that we're all safer.
Raindrops on roses, whiskers on kittens. We'll hear some of August's favorite WWDC things in a moment, but first a word about MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. No one thing can keep your Mac safe. Not one single thing. Digital safety is about a lot of things. Being smart about passwords, taking care with what you download, using a VPN on public Wi-Fi. There are lots of things that you can do to keep yourself safe. High on that list, running good security software. Software like MacScan 3. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by Secure Mac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for well over a decade. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your computer. Stay safer with MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. That's MacScan 3 by Secure Mac. Your 30-day free trial is waiting at securemac.com/MacScan. Right, we've covered a lot of security stuff, though I feel I'd be remiss if I didn't ask August what jazzed him most during the keynote. Because, yeah, August knows a lot about security, but he's a developer first. WWDC is like New Year's for him. Resolutions, new directions, fun stuff. At least that's my guess. I didn't ask him, but that's my guess. Tell me, sir, what were the things that jazzed you most and why?
Raindrops on kittens.
Yeah, well,
wait, that'll do it. I got that wrong, didn't I?
Snowflakes that stay on a thing and another thing. I'm pretty sure that's how it goes. Yeah, what'd you like?
The first thing that I noticed was that the presentation was 2 hours and 20 minutes long.
Yeah.
Which most keynotes, if you look back over the course of the last 10 years or so, most of them round out right at 90 minutes or so. And this was 2 hours and 20 minutes long. I mean, they did the whole sardine into cans kind of thing because they just, kept throwing stuff at you, which is why they did like the speed bumps for the MacBook Pros last week or the week before. Mm-hmm. They're trying to get some of that stuff out, clear the baffles as you would before they went out and did the presentation. The other thing that really struck me is how many times privacy came up. It came up during health. It came up during your photos. It just kept coming up. And that makes me very, very happy because it means that somebody at Apple is taking that stuff extremely seriously. I have a feeling it comes all the way at the top, and I hope that doesn't change because it's so important for all of us. The other thing that struck me was the humor that they used when talking about iTunes. Mm-hmm. Because, we've wanted to break iTunes into bits for a very long time.
Speak for yourself. I'm not kidding. It's fine. I know a lot of people. I know I'm in a shrinking minority, but I want iTunes. I read an article earlier this week that said, don't worry, Windows users, iTunes is going to stay the same. And I thought, I have not envied a Windows user since the day I started using my Mac. And this was the first time. That and they get all the virtual reality, which is kind of a bummer, but Anyway, yeah, so they're breaking that up. It was funny to hear him make fun of it, but well, anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I thought it was refreshing for any company to sit there and poke fun at themselves.
Sure.
Because everyone has been asking that for a long time. Not everyone but you has been asking that for a long time.
Indeed.
One of the other things that really, really fascinated me was how much work is now being done on the devices, whether it's your HomePod or your phone or whatever. In the background, it's running all of these processes to really improve your experience. And I just think that's a testament to their chip manufacturing and design. And it's a testament to what we are able to do on these devices now. I mean, when you think about it, the very first iPhone had more computing power than the rocket that went to the moon. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty crazy. But now, here we are 11 years later, they're just amazing devices.
I don't want to make you feel old, but it's 12. 12 years later. Yeah, no problem. I'm here for you, man. I'm here for you.
And I think the biggest thing that I got from the keynote was, Apple went through a phase with Scully and those guys where they sort of rested on their laurels and they coasted because they had great technology. But then Microsoft was able to completely surpass them because Apple coasted. And it was very obvious to me that they're not coasting. They're saying we're out in front with our technology and we're going to stay there. And they keep moving those goalposts to make it harder for Google and Samsung to keep up. And I loved that. All of the stuff that they're doing is just amazing in terms of, like I said, just setting new boundaries.
One last question.
Okay.
How many Mac Pros are you getting?
72.
Oh, nice. Wow. Good. Be careful, though, because it's the stands that are going to kill you. Apparently, that's the stands are going to what does you in. Hey, if you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is securemac.com/checklist. There you will find notes not only for this show, but for the last show we did, and then all the shows coming up once they become some of the last shows we did. securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. The address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.